Good morning. Nice to see new faces and old faces. I was just feeling the fire element, getting hot, getting ready to come up here, checking my pulse. Oh, 122 beats a minute. And then I have to look at inside. Why am I feeling this? What am I feeling? Fear? Rejection, potentially? I've sat up here a lot and I've never had anybody throw a tomato or a potato or a rock at me. So where does that fear come from? The mind, as Master said, the mind takes over. It does what it wants to do. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is insight meditation and concentration meditation and how they work together. What is Vipassana? How does Vipassana or insight meditation differ from samatha or concentration meditation? These are some of the terms that you probably are already familiar with. Vipassana is insight, sometimes referred to as clear seeing, satipajjhana. And what we take from insight is the wisdom of the understanding of the true nature of reality. Shamatha is calm or concentration meditation, which is a necessary prerequisite to insight meditation. You have to have a stable, calm mind in order to do the investigation that you have to do in insight meditation. Sati, everybody knows the word meditation. Mindfulness, meditation is something that's very widespread right now. There's many different kinds of meditation. We're talking about two specific Buddhist type of meditations today. But you're probably very familiar with something called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, that is using calm meditation to restructure the mind through neuroplasticity to help alleviate anxiety, addiction. There's a whole host of benefits of that type of meditation. And then panya or prajna is wisdom. And this is what comes from understanding reality and looking at taking a deep dive into it. So the goal of insight meditation is what's called nibbana, the unconditioned, the only unconditioned state that you'll ever find. Some people call it nirvana, although that may bring to mind a certain rock band from long ago. And as I said, what's the function? The function is to see the three marks of existence, the three characteristics: impermanence, suffering, dukkha. Dukkha is a term there's no good English translation for dukkha. Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's probably the greatest Buddhist scholar of today, living, although Bhikkhu Analayo was very close, both of them would say that dukkha is better described, instead of suffering, as unsatisfactoriness. Because even when you find pleasure, that pleasure won't last. It's the nature of impermanence that things have a life cycle, beginning, a middle, and an end. So even though you grasp for the pleasure in something, it's not going to sustain for very long. And as I said, insight is experiential. In other words, you have to find it for yourself. One of the major teachings of the Buddha, one of the major discourses, is what's called the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, or the Satipatthana Sutra. And these four things that you see here: body, feelings, Vedana or Vedana, mind or heart. Chitta is a Pali word that means, it can mean mind or heart. If you look at all of the Pali canon, even the Chinese agamas, you're going to find that in ancient Buddhist psychology, the mind was not real, the brain itself was not really referenced very much. So this from a historical perspective probably means more heart than mind, but today it's used for both. And then Dhamma is mental phenomena, things, everything that we see is a self-construct. We see a chair, we don't see the atoms. The mind has labeled it as a chair, even though its component constituents are completely disparate or completely different. They don't make up a chair, but we've come to realize them in our mind conventionally that it is a chair. The sutra is so important that the Buddha states emphatically, and I think it's important, before I go further, when we read the Buddha's words, or we listen to Dharma talks, or we read commentaries by the scholars, it's important to look at the Buddha's words as instructions, because he lays out a path. And if you follow the path, if you walk that path, you're going to end up the way he did, enlightened. It just may take many lifetimes. But it's important in this lifetime to think of the Buddha's words as instructions, almost a recipe book for happiness. This quote more fully is the Four Foundations of Mindfulness is also called the direct path to realization. And he says this is the direct path to purification, for the surmounting of sorrow and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of nirvana, nibbana, the highest peace, namely the four foundations of mindfulness. And the importance of those in the meditation context is that those four foundations are an important framework for meditation itself. Meditation on the body, meditation on feelings, meditation on the mind, phenomena. So we discussed this. The concentration meditation leads to deep states of concentration that are called jhanas. And jhanas are where you become fixed on one point. The mind calms down. There are less thoughts. You won't stop thinking. I suppose when maybe you get to the fourth jhana, then there may be some cessation of thinking. But the mind, at our level of practice, the mind never stops thinking. When I first started meditation, I talked to Master at a private interview and a retreat, and I said, I can't stop thinking. And he said, oh, you won't stop thinking. But the key to meditation is bring the mind back to the object. For example, if you're meditating on the breath, and the Buddha gave instruction in both the Anapanasati Sutra, mindfulness of breathing, and the Satipatthana Sutra, almost identical instruction on meditation on the breath. I know I'm breathing in. I know I'm breathing out. Breathing in long, I breathe in long. Breathing out short, I breathe out short. And he didn't give this instruction so that you followed it to the T. He's only instructing you to watch your breath. And on practice, you'll find that there's a thought. You recognize the thought and you bring your mind back to the breath or whatever your object of meditation is. This repeated process, bringing the mind back, no matter how many times it wanders. I mean, I've been meditating and I end up in Amsterdam. It's like, how did I get here? I'm not supposed to be here. Bring the mind back to the object of meditation over and over and over and over. And you train the mind. This is all about mind training. It's the example of often given is an elephant, a wild elephant. They put a firm post in the ground, they tie him to a lead, and they let him run himself out. It's just like that for the mind. You have to train the mind, and the more you practice, the more the mind responds because it changes the physiology in the brain. They've done MRI scans, what's called a functional MRI, on experienced meditators. They notice that there's changes in the amygdala, which is the fear, flight or fight area. There's increase in the gray matter. And they've even done studies on novice meditators who, after 6 weeks of meditation, had increased gray matter in the frontal cortex, which is just amazing when you think about it. As I said, Vipassana is the insight meditation, insight knowledge. So we're instructed to watch the breath, watch the thought arise and pass away. And you know the cycle of life. I told you before, everything's a circle. In fact, there's a meditation technique from the 1st century, from the Savastivadins, that calls for, as you're breathing, rising, abiding, that's the middle point of existence for anything. For example, if I have a ball and I throw it straight up into the air, at some point that ball's suspended. It's neither arising, it's neither falling. At that point, it's abiding. And then there's changing, the downward part of it, and then there's ceasing, or you could say death. So that is the fundamental structure of what we're doing when we're doing the arising and ceasing of focusing on the breath. And if you're concerned about meditation, well, let me say it this way. If you want meditation to lead to insight, then you have to go to the next level. You have to go to the next level concerning these 3 marks of existence: impermanence, dukkha or unsatisfactoriness, and anatta, no self. And you see that word there, ipasiko. That's a Pali word that the Buddha used because he would teach to whoever would listen. Some people were advanced meditators. Some people were just interested what he had to say. And he would tell them, "Ipaseko." That means come and see. It means verify for yourself. If the truth of the teaching doesn't land for you, then throw it out. Pay no attention to it. Find something else. He was far from a salesman. He just presented the path. And if you didn't like it, he didn't try to chase you down and convince you. That's why it's so experientially based. So as I said, the practice of mindfulness is not the end goal. We talked about mindfulness-based stress reduction, reducing all kinds of physical ailments and mental suffering. But that is not the end all of our particular practice. We want to gain the wisdom that comes from vipassana or insight meditation. There are 9 that I've got listed here. And although they're all equally important, probably the one that sticks out for me is arising and passing away, along with the knowledge of the marks, the 3 characteristics, along with equanimity. Equanimity and patience are 2 of the most important components of meditation, because you're going to have doubt. You're going to have doubt that arises. Oh, I can't do this, or this is stupid. This is getting me nowhere. There are 2 kinds of doubt. There's a skeptical doubt. Oh, I don't believe Jeffrey Epstein hung himself. That's a skeptical doubt. You can investigate that. And then there's doubt that comes from fear and aversion. Doubt that is not based on investigation so much as it's based on fear. And why is equanimity so important? Equanimity is the ability of the mind to stay unshaken under any circumstance. If you see a huge boulder in a stream, the river flows around it. The rock is not affected by the water. And that's kind of the way that we look to be when we gain insight knowledge, to understand the reality of impermanence in such a way that it opens the heart and lessens the reactivity that we have in our everyday life. The Vipassana meditation, one of the most important aspects of it is investigation. In fact, in the Abhidharma, which is an ancient book in both the Pali and the Chinese writings, the Abhidharma is referred to as the book of Buddhist psychology. Although I've never read it, because it's 6,000 pages long, I think. There are 9 books altogether, but Bhikkhu Bodhi is given a translation. And one of the most important things in there is the ability to investigate. When you're in meditation, the ability to investigate the rising and falling of phenomena. In fact, investigation is one of the 7 factors or as the Buddha called it, wings of awakening. So that tells you how important it is. We talked about impermanence and the importance of understanding impermanence. And I think if you walked up to anybody on the street and said, things change, don't they? They would say, yeah, everything changes. But in our meditative practice, we need to go to the next level. Below that, everything changes. Why does it change? How does it change? How do we get to a state where we can say with some certainty that we're progressing on the path? It's important to practice every day. Some days maybe something happens, you can't do it. But in order to build the habit and gain the insight knowledge, you have to practice meditation. It's just the way the cookbook's written. And if you don't, you can't expect success or progress. There's a lot of, you see a lot of stuff on YouTube about monks that can levitate or monks that have supernatural powers, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ability to be happy. I mean, in your daily life, you can be more happy than you are right now. The Buddha has said that the true mark of happiness is finding peace. And you can't get any better than that, really. So the importance of understanding impermanence can't be emphasized enough, because if you understand impermanence, then you understand that clinging creates suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And you can also see that based on the notion of impermanence, there really is no concrete self. One of the three marks of existence, the characteristics, because everything's constantly changing. I mean, even as we're sitting here, I'm breathing out, you're breathing in, I'm breathing in, I'm taking parts of you in, and you're taking parts of me. Because I'm giving off carbon, and I'm taking in your carbon. I talked briefly about neuroplasticity. There's absolutely no investigation that you can do to refute the scientific principle, the medical principle of neuroplasticity. That is, you train your mind by repetition. It's just like what's called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to implied demand, in physiology or physical therapy. If you want to get big muscles, you lift weights and stay away from steroids, right? Because the muscle responds to the weight that you lift. The brain is not any different. It will respond to the input that you give it. If you give it a chance, you can change it. it's also important to do your best to try and stay mindful when you're just going about your daily life, when you're not meditating. Find yourself connecting with the moment that you're in, whether it's washing the dishes, whether it's walking the dog. The master even says that when he's driving his car, he becomes the car, and his scope of vision expands around the car. This kind of practice can help you assimilate the mindfulness and the insights in a daily way. So insight is clear seeing into the nature of reality. Continuous practice will bear fruit. And you can read the quote from the Buddha. The Dharma has one taste, the taste of liberation. But I also would add that the practice also has the taste of happiness. It will bring happiness to you. It will lessen your reactivity, your anxiety, your blood pressure. I would like to read to you something from a book called The Manual of Insight. This was written by a monk, I think in the 20s. His name is Ledi Sayadaw, but he's not a lady. His name is Ledi, but it's pronounced lady. And this is a little chapter in his manual of insight called The Practice of Insight Meditation. And this really gives it to you in a thumbnail how to practice this. And the book goes into detail about, well, let me just read it. I will now indicate the main points necessary to those who practice the exercises of insight. Of the three knowledges of insight, the knowledge of impermanence must first and foremost be acquired. How? He then gives the analogy of a movie. When he wrote this movie, a movie was made up of numerous pictures. Now, I suppose it's pixels, thousands and thousands of pixels. But if you look at a movie, no matter whether you're at Warenberg or whatever the name of the place is now, or you're sitting at home watching your TV, it becomes real. You become insatiated with the story. You're not looking to see, oh, well, there's a pixel that's off there. And he says that all these continuously changing photographs, pixels, which produce a fluid motion, is the representation of impermanence or death. And when I'm reading this, I thought, oh, death. When I heard that word, I was like, what was that about? I had a visceral reaction to the word death. So I kind of investigated, and I'm like, yeah, death is a tough word. Today, we use cessation instead of death, but it's the same thing. Once the process is gone, it's dead, right? If we carefully examine the movements in a movie scene, such as walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, and so forth, of the parts of the body during a moment in time, we will see that these are full of changes or full of impermanence. Now we must apply this to ourselves. The impermanence and the death of or cessation of mental and material phenomena are to be found to the full in our bodies, our heads, every part of the body. If we are able to discern clearly those functions of impermanence and death or cessation, which are always operating in our bodies, we shall acquire the insight of the destruction into the breaking up, falling off, cessation, and changes of various parts of the body in every second and every fraction of a second. If this be the last discern, then it may be said that the exercise on the contemplation of impermanent is accomplished. And if the exercise on the contemplation of impermanence is well accomplished, then that of the contemplation of non-soul, no self, non-self is also accomplished. You'll find in the modern Buddhist teachings that they don't talk about non-soul. And I don't know if that is a function of trying to be less offensive, because I've always been taught it's no self or non-self. But when you think about it, no soul or non-soul would be equivalent. If this is the last discern, then it may be said that the exercise on the contemplation of impermanence is well accomplished. And oops, by the word accomplished, it is meant that the exercise has been properly worked out so as to remain a permanent possession. This is the neuroplasticity I'm talking about. He had no idea there was such a thing as neuroplasticity. I mean, it's only been around for 15 or 20 years. But he says it's going to be a permanent possession during the whole of life. The meditators or practitioners of insight, however, for the whole term of life, must gladly continue in the exercise on the contemplation of impermanence until the exercise is systematically worked out. Even the arahants, enlightened people, do not give up these exercises for the securing of tranquility of mind. Tranquility is another factor of the 7 factors of awakening. So thank you for listening. I hope I didn't invoke the fire element too much.